Welcome to another episode of Fandom X Archive. I'm your host, Dinara Tengri, a.k.a. Alien Super Soldier. This episode comes with a trigger warning. We're going to talk about homophobia. We're also going to talk about fanfiction, slashfic, erotica, pornography, romance, sexual preferences, gender identity, neurodivergence, and, as I mentioned before, homophobia as it exists within the X-Files fandom. So, without further ado, let's get started. This is the most difficult script I've had to write so far. When I decided what topic I wanted to talk about, I was foolish enough to think that I could find all the answers to all of my questions here on the World Wide Web, and that it would only take me a couple of weeks. The scientist in me should have raised a skeptical eyebrow and questioned not only my hopeful optimism, but the way I had posed the question in the first place, and my own base assumptions. My base assumption was that there was more diversity in the X-Files fandom before, in terms of ships, and especially queer ships, and more acceptance of character interpretations that were not rooted so firmly in MSR. What I should have done was to say that my hypothesis is that there used to be more diversity and acceptance of queer ships and queer character interpretations back in the 90s and early 2000s based on my own personal experiences. Does my impression correspond with reality? It is when I began this tedious process called research that I began to worry. I began to worry that not only was my base assumption possibly erroneous, but that there was not enough material, not enough information to either prove or disprove my hypothesis. 2 weeks in, and I was no longer afraid to eat my words. You're a woman of science, baby. If you're not willing to admit that you have been wrong, what are you even doing here? But I was afraid that I couldn't write a coherent script with a clear through line and one where I could answer my questions. Instead, what I have, are fragments of information about slashfic, namely my doomed OTP, Mulder and Krychek, and testimonies from OG fans about, quote, how it used to be, end quote. A major reason why information was so hard to obtain was because nothing ever stays for too long on the internet. Most news groups and forums exist in people's memories only, and as fanlore articles. So what to do with this not-so-hefty volume of academic articles, archived Tumblr posts, and fanlore wiki? Before we answer this question, though, I need to explain why I chose queer identity and slash within this fandom, and on the show, in the first place. About a month ago, there was drama on Twitter, caused by some fans who became seemingly personally offended that other fans expressed that they interpret Mulder and Scully as queer and or neurodivergent. And even though I myself was not subjected to any attacks or backlash, just being in the same space as these fans and reading their tweets and seeing how outright hostile they were acting towards fans who dared say that they simply interpret Mulder and Scully as autistic or bisexual made me feel unwelcome. It's not a word I throw around lightly. But as a queer woman, I felt, for the first time since I became active in the fandom in 2009, that I wasn't welcome, or that I was welcome as long as I adhered to some non-existent rules about what discourse and what interpretations are allowed in the fandom. Don't Say Gay had somehow seeped into a fan space that has been known for slashfic and gay memes. And to that I say, not on my watch. And this is another reason why I've been having problems with the script. I chose this topic as a direct reaction to the Twitter drama, and I don't like making reactionary content. For fuck's sake, the whole point of this podcast is to explore and study the history of our fandom, not get tangled up in whatever current drama of the week we're dealing with. And I knew that even in choosing to explore the history of slashfic and queerness in our fandom, I had to address the arguments made by those troublemaking Twitter users who made the rest of us feel unsafe and unwelcome. Address, and in the true Dana Scully fashion, debunk them. And debunk them I shall, because these arguments are not just based on faulty logic, they're also exclusionary, bigoted, and very conceited. That's a mouthful, but we will get through it, one drop at a time. So, strap in. Chapter 1. What the hell is slashfic? If you listen to my podcast, or if you've just been hanging around this thing called the internet, chances are you know what terms like slash, ship, and fanfiction are. But for those of you who haven't been chronically online for the past 25 years, here's a brief rundown. Fanfiction are stories written by fans that are set in the fictional universe of their favorite show, book, movie, or game involving their favorite characters. Fanfiction is not bound to any specific genre, but the majority of fanfiction resides within the romance and erotica categories. For instance, if you have ever written a novel or a script about Mulder and Scully hunting Bigfoot and then making hot sex on its still warm carcass, congratulations, you have written a fanfic. Real people fanfiction is also a thing, but we don't talk about it here. Ship is a phenomenon when a fan or a group of fans root for two characters in a favorite piece of media to fall in love, start a relationship, and engage in all sorts of shenanigans of the sexual nature. While the phenomenon itself has been around since times immemorial, the term ship, with all its derivatives, has been coined by our little fandom, and that is something I will never shut up about. Slash is a type of fanfiction involving two or more characters of the same gender falling in love, starting a relationship, and getting involved in all sorts of shenanigans of the sexual nature. Now that we have covered the basics, let's talk more about slash. In the International Handbook of Virtual Learning Environments, Volume 1, Rochelle Mazar and Rhiannon Burry take a closer look at fanfiction, and specifically at slashfic, as a countercultural and subversive phenomenon. Mazar writes, quote, "A fanfiction writer is not only writing a story when they write fanfiction, they are entering into territory inhabited by many other fans. The characters these writers animate are well loved by their audiences, and the universes whose rules they bend and twist have housed thousands of television shows, books, comics. Every reader has a sense of what is legitimate or canon behavior. When rules are broken or mistakes made, a fan will always notice. Readers and writers take these stories very seriously and spend hours dissecting characteristics and situations, imagining alternative or unwritten scenes, or giving motivations to minor characters and bad guys." End quote. Mazar refers to the English professor and prolific fanfiction author Tamiris and quotes her cross-fandom essay, Domestic Penetration. Quote, "There is something undeniably penetrative when one man invites himself in. Mi casa es su casa." End quote. There is certainly a vulnerability and openness when one male character is inviting another male character into his home, and therefore into his life, something that carries even more weight in an enemies to lovers story. In The Reunion, Part 2 of the untitled Mulder and Krychek series I co-wrote with bisexual Mulder, Mulder goes to Russia to rescue his former enemy from the Russian mafia. He finds Krychek alone and injured in a secret apartment in Moscow. Mulder gets a rare and much appreciated glimpse into the private life of the man he spent his whole life despising, and finds that there may be more under the rough surface. And as Mulder is standing to Krychek's sexy wounds, the two of them engage in a back and forth of figuring out their relationship, complete with such beloved fanfic tropes as teasing, breaking down in each other's arms, and, yes, sleeping together platonically. Employing the classic "I don't want to sleep alone" move, Krychek invites Mulder to spend the night with him. And now Krychek's sheets have known Mulder's scent. Krychek's bed has known the weight of Mulder's body. It's somewhat telling that neither my writing partner or myself were aware of the significance of these tropes. We were simply drawing from the decades-old tradition of slashfic and, more importantly, writing what we felt was in character for these men. Adherence to canon, as we will see later, is an essential part of slashfic and queer readings of established characters. however counterintuitive it may sound. If you open any academic text on slashfic, it will most likely open with the fact that slashfic in its current form originated in the Star Trek fandom. You can even make the claim that Kirk and Spock were sort of proto-MSR minus the gay part, but that's food for some future thought. Before the age of the interwebs, fanfiction was distributed in the fanzines, which were editorialized, which meant that distribution of slashfic was somewhat restricted, depending on the open-mindedness of the editor. Here are some testimonies from Mazar's survey of slashfic enthusiasts. Says Drusilla, quote, I first remember hearing about Slash way back in the 70s when I was in high school. I heard Slash mentioned in connection to Star Trek, the original series, and also Starsky and Hutch. There was a local science fiction bookstore called Lois Newman's, which kept a stock of fanzines that you could go in and read at your leisure. I read a very tame by current standards Kirk and Spock story and was shocked. At the time, I thought it was weird and strange and kinky and wrong. Little did I know that 2 decades later, I'd be writing it. User Estraven remembers underground free magazines, the type that flourish around university campuses. These publications, they say, tend to be very liberal on all fronts, sexual included. With the advent of the internet, however, anyone could post any story they wanted without having to go through an editor, and all bets were off. Writes Mazar, quote, it is safe to claim that the production of fanfic in general, and Slash in particular, has increased exponentially with the networks of distribution afforded by information and communication technologies. This increase directly correlates to the dramatic increase in the number of women with the access to the internet. End quote. To quote another academic text, in their dissertation, How Does Postmodernist Theory Inform Our Reading of Mulder and Krychek's Slashfiction? By Jedrzak M. Duzinski. Duzinski writes, quote, this meant that specialism in fanfiction could develop at a much quicker pace, and rather than excluding the more alternative approaches such as slashfiction, as might be the case when the page space was limited in a fanzine and controlled by an overseeing editor, hosts of fanfiction archives became much more inclusive. This inclusivity allowed for a much quicker evolution of certain genres and strengthening of fan culture as a whole. End quote. It is an accepted assumption that fanfiction is an artistic field dominated by women. A lot of the academic research that I have come across attempts to answer the question of why it is that women, specifically cishet women, enjoy writing and reading M&M/. M&M/ means men and men / not Eminem. Some of the research I have encountered is so subpar that I have half a mind to dedicate a whole episode to just laughing at it. But if we return to Mazar and Burry, who actually take time to ask some of the women in our demographic, we can get some understanding as to why women enjoy stories about boys kissing boys. The parallels with porn had been made ad nauseum, and the arguments made that women enjoy written erotica, not just Slash, the same way that men enjoy Pornhub. That view is problematic and reductive in ways that we don't have the time to get into here. Mazar, bless her, offers a different explanation. Quote, Slash is best understood as a queer romance. 4 of the participants said that they particularly enjoyed first-time fic, that is, stories involving the realization of the 2 characters that they are both in love and sexually attracted to each other. End quote. She makes the distinction between Slash and conventional romance. Quote, conventional in this context obviously means heterosexual. Jean and Kenzie, however, emphasize the difference between the published romance and Slash, noting that Slash has more depth or was free of the genre's restrictions. At the same time, members wanted stories to contain graphic descriptions of homosexual oral and anal sex, although most rejected the term pornography. Here's some of the answers given by the women in the survey. Quote, gay porn tends to be, well, different, less relationship-oriented, more into action and interaction, if you know what I mean. End quote. Another woman says, if there's a relationship and an emotional attachment between the characters that comes through in the story, then it's erotica. If it's pure sex with no characterization or development, or if it's patently obvious that the writer is only writing to get off or get the reader off, then it's porn. And neither is good or bad. They just are. Finally, Mazar quotes a study that defines queer text or textual elements as a range or a network of non-straight ideas in which the lesbian, gay, and bisexual or other non-normative sexuality are combined. We should absolutely have discussions about straight women fetishizing gay men in fanfiction in a similar way that straight men fetishize gay women in porn. We can talk about the misogyny and hatred of female characters in some slash fandoms, which is ironic considering that these spaces are predominantly made up of women. Here I will simply comment that, to me, the least compelling type of slashfic is where sex is all you get. I am not interested in reading a graphic scene on its own, but when it comes as a payoff or part of an emotionally charged interaction between two characters I love. Het or slash, I'd argue that most of us who read and write fanfiction do it because we love seeing our favorite characters fall in love with each other over and over again. Even before I realized that I was bisexual, straight romance, for the most part, didn't interest me. It just didn't do it for me. I love Mulder and Scully. Theirs is arguably the most complex and well-written relationship on TV. I love watching their friendship and later on their love grow deeper, get tested, and reveal new truths about themselves. That being said, for reasons that I might get into in a future episode, I don't want to see them bumping uglies on screen, and graphic MSR fanfiction straight up makes me uncomfortable. Most of the analysis and explanations of why women enjoy slash that I have come across adopt a heteronormative stance and look at cishet women almost exclusively. Instead, the question we should be asking ourselves are, why do straight women enjoy M and M slash? And what kind of slashfic do lesbian women, bisexual women, trans women enjoy, and why? Personally, slash allows me to relate and connect to love stories and erotic scenarios independent of my own gender and sexuality. And in cases like Mulder and Krychek, it's very rewarding and gratifying to see that love and tenderness can be made possible between two male characters that, under normal circumstances, are hostile to one. For context, here are some more answers provided by the women in the survey. Quote, as bisexual women in monogamous lesbian relationships, it's nice to have some men in our lives, end quote. Megan writes, I read and enjoy slash on two levels. At the basic level, it feeds my kinks and gives me a thrill to read really good slash where the author has taken time to work on the characters. It doesn't have to have a great plot or any plot, just good characterization and sex. On another level, there is the whole two men realizing, sometimes for the first time, they are in love with their male partner and dealing with the ramifications that go with such revelation. Mazar clarifies that the ramifications and that which needs to be overcome are likely oblique references to heterosexism and homophobia that men who decide to enter into a same-sex relationship in real life face. It goes without saying that quality matters, even to us slash-loving sick freaks. All the things that are important in an original book, like grammar, pacing, and research, which includes researching your sex scenes, are just as important in fanfiction. The most important thing, and the thing that can make or break a fanfic, is of course characterization. We know our characters, and when a novice fanfic author has them do something out of character, we react. I remember reading a fanfic that took place after the episode on Me and had Mulder confronting Scully about her field trip with the cancer man. How was the fanfic? Well, if you like your Mulder abusive and oozing toxic masculinity, and you like your Scully acting like a repentant trad wife, plus some dubious consent thrown in for good measure, then you'll enjoy a story like that. But most of the reviews fans left on that fanfic were negative, with most pointing out how out of character Mulder and Scully were. Based on the responses in a survey, Burry concludes that to fans, characterization, part of which involves adherence to the primary text or canon, is one of the most important things in a good fanfic. She writes, quote, "What is on offer is a postmodern redeployment of bourgeois aesthetics. Slash is not seen as a derivative or of lesser value than original fiction. On the contrary, it's more highly valued because, unlike other texts, it can be held accountable for its intertextuality." She goes on to say, "Expectations that Slash writers have an extensive and in-depth knowledge of canon may seem contradictory, but the sexual orientation of the characters is not as straightforward as it may appear." End quote. Okay, let's take a deep breath and process what we have talked about so far as we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this episode, why Slash matters. If we go back to Duzinski's dissertation about my favorite boys, Mulder and Krycek, they write that unlike the TV writer whose creative vision and ability to experiment is restricted by the expectations of the medium, the executives, and the cultural restrictions, the fanfic author has a lot more freedom to experiment and play with the established characters and canon. In other words, the established canon becomes to us fans a playground on which we can play with the tools given to us and make our own interpretations of the characters based on both the textual and subtextual information. The right to interpret lies at the heart of media consumption. Duzinski writes, quote, "If it is plausible that even the most casual viewer of the X-Files plays a role in determining how the characters might be interpreted, then existence of slash fiction writers presents a much clearer case of something called semiotic democracy. The environment of fandom is richly interpretive. The analyses thus produced form a dynamic interpretive space in which a multitude of understandings of the source can form, grow, and change." End quote. This right to interpret has close ties with the infamous death of the author. Quoting Duzinski again, "At the heart of fanfiction is the progressive reimagining of the characters and universes that are brought to life by the original author. Even if we take what might be the strongest example of the immutability of the canon, works of literature written by a single author who is isolated from an industry or other influences that might corrupt their singular vision, there is still a case to be made that the characters they produce are not bound to a single interpretations." End quote. Duzinski argues that the mechanisms involved in the creation, distribution, and interpretation of slash fanfiction constitute postmodernist practice. Like a bricoleur, the fan writer gathers sections and segments, archetypes and themes, and then recombines them to make something different. They also write, quote, "If Chris Carter really intended Mulder to have a broadly speaking sexually unresolved yet emotionally involved relationship, why did it need to be with a woman? He could have achieved this character trait just as effectively if the object of Mulder's unresolved love was a male partner, especially due to the fact that sexual contact is such a minor part in Mulder and Scully's relationship. It seems likely that he chose a heterosexual partnership because it was closer to his experience and it was part of the broader status quo. Mulder and Krycek slash fiction is distinct in its portrayal of a deep emotional involvement between Mulder and another character." End quote. This reminds me of an interview with Carter which I read eons ago and that I cannot quote, so you'll have to take my word for it, or don't, where he once again argued against the possibility of Mulder and Scully getting together, saying that, "Why does it have to be Mulder and Scully? I can just as easily write Scully getting involved with Skinner, or Mulder getting involved with Skinner." So there you have it, whether ironically or sincerely, CC endorsed slash. Not that the creator's approval has ever been important for us horny fanfic authors. And if you forgive me a few more quotes by Duzinski, their essay is just so good. Quote, "In Mulder Krycek slash fiction, this process is evident in the discussion of unresolved sexual tension, or UST, between the two characters. Fans genuinely feel that they have perceived a sexual dimension to the Mulder-Krychek relationship, even if the creators were not willing to recognize it. Indeed, this lack of a sexual partner is consistent with how the writers of the original script imagined Mulder. On-screen, Mulder's obsession and misanthropic nature reinforces the credibility of his interest in Scully. There is nothing about his belief in the paranormal and desire to uncover a government cover-up that suggests his sexuality has to manifest in a straight relationship. Indeed, it is surprising that a television series that is so capable of thinking outside the box in terms of its subject matter is so limited in terms of its portrayal of sexuality. And that is something that I wish we had more time to talk about in this episode, but I guess I'll have to save it for another time, is how the X-Files as a show was so good at subverting gender roles and at the same time was so bound to this heteronormative gender binary culture, if you will, and how Mulder and Scully's relationship, whichever way you choose to look at it, was very challenging of the heteronormative status quo of the television and culture at the time, and at the same time it still reinforced some of those roles and ideals. But like I said, that's for another time. The practice of slashing our favorite characters is dependent on the understanding of and respect for the canon. And Duzinski emphasizes that slashfic authors are doing more than just reiterating our own tastes and biases. Indeed, we are acting like amateur detectives or profilers, searching for clues and hints, whether intentional or accidental, drawing on inferences and characteristics that we understand as queer or neurodivergent. Bisexual Mulder once had a whole Instagram account where they analyzed Mulder's sexuality episode by episode based on clues they found in the text. Which is why the argument that Mulder and Scully are not gay because they don't say that out loud on the show is bad, and anyone making it should feel bad. Not once do either of them say, as a strictly heterosexual federal agent, I say that this case has a logical or paranormal explanation. Instead, most people assume that Mulder and Scully are heterosexual, not based on any clues the writers give us, but because our society is still operating on heteronormative understanding of the world and the media. Another argument that I just love, sarcasm, is Mulder and Scully cannot be gay because they've been in love with each other from first sight. First of all, bisexual people exist, and speaking as a bisexual woman, if that's the argument you're making, kindly eat a fluke worm. Secondly, while the fans, MSR shippers mostly, have spent countless hours debating exactly when Mulder and Scully's relationship became sexual, canonically it didn't happen until late season 7. That's what the text says. Everything else is inference, guesswork, and interpretation. MSR shippers that look for clues that Mulder and Scully had a sexual relationship before all things are no different than Mulder and Krychek shippers or Scully and Reyes shippers looking for clues that these characters also had sexual relationships. And notice how I say also, because the existence of a bisexual Mulder or a pansexual Scully does not in any way contradict the fact that they fall in love with each other. Shipping is a preference, and we all have a right to ship whatever characters we like based on nothing more than clues and inferences. But to claim that one ship is more valid or more important simply because it's a straight one is, well, problematic. And those fans who attempt to silence queer fans and fans who prefer queer ships simply because they disagree with our interpretation of these characters, characters that don't belong to any of us, engage in the worst kind of gatekeeping. It's worse than gatekeeping, it's censorship. It's saying that you can be part of this fandom as long as you adhere to our interpretation of these characters. For instance, some fans interpret Mulder and Scully as neurodivergent, which other fans have also reacted against. Here's why those angry fans are wrong. As a neurotypical person, I don't see anything in Mulder and Scully's behavior that can be perceived as neurodivergent, but that's my subjective perception. And I trust and respect that fans who are on the autism spectrum or fans who do have ADHD do see something in these characters that confirms that interpretation. The same way that you need to trust queer fans to see character traits that confirm our interpretations that Mulder and Scully are flaming bisexuals. Finally, my favorite, again sarcasm, argument against queer interpretations and slashfic is, I'm an OG X-Files fan and we didn't engage in such filth. These new fans are ruining my fandom with their gay. Well, I'm an OG X-Files fan too, and you're wrong. Learn your history. For context, the first known Mulder and Skinner fanfiction was written in 1995, and the first Mulder-Krycek fanfiction was written even earlier than that. I'd argue that slashers have existed for as long as this fandom has existed. In fact, in those early days, some fans were complaining that the X-Files didn't have enough slashable characters, and that slowly began to change with the introduction of our dear old rat boy. And even a cursory search on the alt.tv.xfiles archive will show you that fans have been discussing and debating the characters' sexualities during the show's original run. So far, I have only been talking about Slash, and that has mostly to do with my own shippy preferences. One of those days I'm going to do an episode that is just about Mulder and Krycek. But the F and F slash or Femslash has been just as prevalent in our fandom and just as important. Do you ship Scully with Monica Reyes, Marita Covarrubias, or Diana Fowley? What does it mean for women fans to interpret Scully as bisexual or lesbian and imagine her in a relationship with another woman? In her seminal essay Slashing Scully, the legendary X-Files fan and fanfiction author Dasha K. writes, quote, I know, a lot of you are thinking, but Scully wouldn't do that. Yep, I can hear you from my dining room, but let's think about it for a second. We have seen her attracted to men on the X-Files. She even may or may not have slept with Ed Jerson ever again. She may or may not be in love with Mulder. Again, I think so, but that's just me. But has she ever made any kind of statement that would indicate that she would never, ever consider having a sexual relationship with a woman? Nope. And for many of us in the fanfic world, we consider that to be a green light to go ahead and pair her with a woman. Actually, if she did say something like, no, Mulder, I'm 100% heterosexual, we'd probably slash her anyhow and just call it an alternate universe. In other words, if you can make it believable to me, I'll buy into Scully with another woman. Hook, line, and sinker. End quote. Here, Dasha succinctly reiterates the point that I have been trying to make. If a character's sexuality and romantic preferences haven't been explicitly stated in a text, the viewers will make their own interpretations based on what is shown and said in the text. Again, we return to this postmodern model of interpretation and reimagining of the canon. In her essay, Mulder/Scully versus the G-Woman and the Fowl one, Dr. Bethan Jones writes, quote, Chris Carter has often talked about his deliberate reversal of gender in the series. Mulder is intuitive and empathic, the believer, all traditionally feminine characteristics, while Scully is the scientist, the skeptic, the rational one. Mulder and Scully are not your traditional romantic leads, and this allowed us fanfic writers to play with the relationship expectations, even in the context of what appears to be traditional romantic stories or premises. End quote. She goes on to write that one reason Slash is appealing as a genre is that an equal relationship between a man and a woman is not possible in a patriarchal society in which we live, and Slash between men enables writers to examine relationships between characters who are equals. Whether the same is true for Femslash depends on who you ask. Some academics argue that women are not equals in a patriarchal society, even if they may be equals in a lesbian relationship. Other research argues that Femslash has been largely ignored by fic writers because there is not enough strong female characters on television. In Scully and Fowley, the X-Files offers two characters who easily qualify. Their roles as FBI special agents place them relatively high up the chain within the male-dominated field of law enforcement, And while arguments can be made about their lack of equality within the institution of the federal government specifically and patriarchal society more generally, nonetheless, they are each other's equals. Dr. Jones goes on to write, I'd argue that what is happening in fic like this one is not so different from what occurs in shipper fanfiction. At least up until season 8, there was no sexual element to Mulder and Scully's relationship. Fans are thus able to find queer pleasure in the text by writing stories in which they are a couple and by drawing on the gender reversal created by Carter. Fans similarly find queer pleasure in the text through writing Mulder Fowl and Scully Fowl Femslash. Each of these are non-normative pairings, at least within the X-Files universe, and each fleshes out the characters' backstories and motivations in an attempt to understand them better. Each also further critiques canon's construction of gender and the role it plays in romantic relationships. Chapter 3: Homophobia and Inclusivity in Our Fandom. As I have said in the beginning of this episode, my original mission statement was to show that there was more ship diversity in the fandom and more freedom to interpret the characters in different ways. Well, the most I can say, based both on sparse research and on my own general vibes, that it is both true and not true. It's true in terms of strong slash presence within the fanfiction community. Is slashfic still as big as it was in the days before? Since I haven't read new fanfiction in years, I have no way of answering this question. But based on the vibes I'm getting, I'll say that slashfic is not as popular in the X-Files fandom as it once was. Now, as for the inclusivity and gatekeeping, despite the occasional drama such as the one that inspired this episode, I feel like this fandom is more inclusive and freer in terms of character interpretations now than it was before. Maybe it's a reflection of how the culture changes in general, but that is why it's all the more important that we encourage inclusivity and make sure that this kind of homophobic censorship is nipped in the bud. And yes, sadly, there has always been some homophobia in our fandom. You don't have to look further than ATX to read some questionable and ill-informed takes on homosexuality and queer ships. I would also argue that the inclusion of younger generations of X-Files fans has injected some fresh blood and fresh interpretations and takes on the characters, especially as it pertains to their sexualities and neurodivergence. And to bookend this episode, allow me to quote Dasha K once again. When she was asked to react to some other fans' alleged transphobia, she wrote an essay on her Tumblr. Quote, as a queer woman who remembers all too well how ridiculously homophobic X-Files fandom could be back in the day, I don't want my blog to ever be a place where queer and trans people feel unsafe. Ever. I also don't want to make queer trans people feel unsafe by ignoring this issue. It looks like alien Scully, the allegedly transphobic fan, did say and do things that were transphobic and hurt other people. That's disappointing and behavior that shouldn't ever happen in our fandom. I hope that she can educate herself and make the effort to change and grow. And I do think that it's ultimately good that others called her out on her transphobic behavior. This is something that we all need to do, queer, trans, or straight, to ensure that fandom is fun and safe for everyone. We're all evolving people. That is the beauty of being human, that we have the capacity to grow into stronger, better, kinder people. End quote. It may seem that in this episode I am arguing against MSR. Not at all. What I am arguing against is this possessive, gatekeeping attitude some fans have towards characters that don't belong to them. The whole point of fan fiction and world building is that it is interpretive and subjective. Even as a writer, once your work has been published, you have lost control of how your readers will interpret your characters. Some interpretations have more support in the text and subtext than others. But unless you have some kind of special license issued by Chris Carter to police other fans' interpretations, you don't have a say in how other fans interpret Mulder, Scully, Krychek, and the rest. I'm not saying that there isn't space in this fandom for meaningful discussions and debates about things like a character's perceived sexuality. But there is a difference between questioning another fan's take and trying to impose a veto on a take you happen to dislike. Well, that's it. That's the episode. I am not totally happy with how it turned out. As I mentioned before, there were other things and themes and subjects that I wanted to touch on, but it's a big one and I just don't have the time to do that here. I also wish I had the time to do more research. In hindsight, maybe I should have taken more time with this episode, but I had to adhere to this once a month schedule. I wish I could have done a better job exploring the history of inclusivity and homophobia in the fandom. As I have said, a lot of the forums and news groups have been lost to the ages, and that makes my perspective very limited. I also wish I could have talked more about Femslash and about how both David Duchovny and Nicholas Lee have read at least one Mulder fanfic and about their reactions. But this was never meant to be an exhaustive deep dive, more of a response to the recent Twitter drama and a short history lesson for myself included. Before I wrap things up, I should mention that I will be taking a longer break from this podcast. It's kind of ironic that just in the last episode I said that I was having so much fun doing this that I want to keep doing it forever. And I still do, just not right now. I don't know if this particular episode has been so exhausting or I just need to take a break in general, but right now, this doesn't feel fun. Working on this episode was anything but fun. And the second your hobby stops being fun, you know that something needs to change. And I'm going to take a longer break and focus on other things and just figure out what it is I want to do, both with this podcast and in this fandom. There are other X-Files projects that I want to start working on. And I feel like I need to just, go on vacation. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitch, where I play the X-Files game. I hope to also play X-Files Resist or Serve in the future and play some other games there. So you can follow me on Twitch. I also do live fanfic reads. You can also join our Discord, where we're just a bunch of X-Files fans that know each other from Instagram and Twitter. And we do X-Files watch parties where we vote on an episode and we watch it together and then discuss it. It's a lot of fun, and what I like about Discord is that it's a much more intimate community where you get to know the other fans, because I think the problem with spaces like Twitter is that you don't see the person behind the account a lot of the times. You don't even know their name. And so it becomes so much easier to just be nasty to them because you don't see that there's a person there with the feelings and a right to express themselves. And I know that I have been guilty of that myself, and that is something that I'm also trying to change. But a space like Discord, like a closed group, is much more intimate and allows you to get to know people on a whole different level. So join us there. Follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter at Dinara Tangri, follow me on Instagram at FandomX Archive Podcast. I will post all the links in the description of the episode. I will post all the sources. I have used so many sources, so many people have contributed unwittingly to making this episode. So I will post all of that. And as you know, I have Drive folder where I keep all my sources that I use in this for this podcast. So I will post the link to that in the description also. I wish you a very good rest of your summer, whatever it is that you're doing this summer. I wish you to be healthy and happy and get some sun, or not if you're not into that. And I will see you next time, whenever that will be. This has been an Alien Super Soldier original production. And bye.